What does it look like when God stands almost alone against a nation that has turned away? When truth is outnumbered, opposition is loud, and even the prophet begins to break. Will God still act? Welcome to Under the Word, where we daily read the scriptures, we wrestle with it, not merely for information, but for formation. I'm sorry, I've been keeping up with my readings and I've been out of the office the last week, so I have not been keeping up with my video posting. So I'm going to do several of them today to catch up. And so let's jump in the reading from where we left off last time, which is 1 Kings chapter 17 through 19, and then Psalm 99. So we remain in the book of Kings, but a new figure now dominates the story, a prophet by the name of Elijah. You see, these chapters mark a decisive confrontation between Yahweh and the God of the small g of the land, Baal. So in fact, so we've been looking at the commentary from House, which is the New American Commentary, and then from Provan, the Understanding the Bible Commentary. So in these chapters, they actually explain to us that Elijah's ministry is not merely prophetic, but they tell us that it's a theological warfare. The issue, I believe, is clear in the reading. That issue is who is truly God. That's really what it comes down to. So let's jump in. First Kings chapter 17 is where Elijah appears suddenly, right? The scripture tells us, as the Lord lives before whom I stand. You see, he announces a drought, a direct challenge to Baal, who was believed to control rain. The God sustains Elijah in unexpected ways. He sends a bird, right? Ravens, in fact, to bring food to him. A widow provides during famine. You see, the widow's flour and oil do not run out. What a miracle, right? So it goes back to the New Testament of the loaves and fish. You see, dear friends, this demonstrates that God's sovereignty over provision. Then her son dies, and Elijah prays, and God restores the child back to life. See, we see miracles not just in the New Testament through the ministry of Jesus or the apostles, but even in the Old Testament. See, the New American Commentary, House, notes that this is one of the earliest resurrection accounts in the scripture, and ultimately showing that Yahweh, so the covenantal God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, today your God and my God, he holds the power over life and death. Not Baal, not this made up human God. And then if you remember in chapter 18, First Kings chapter 18, this chapter is the turning point, right? So here is where Elijah confronts King Ahab and the prophets of Baal or Baal. How long will you go limping between two opinions is the question. Here, in the original language, the imagery here suggests wavering. It is divided loyalty. See, the contest is simple. Whichever God answers by fire is the one true God. So since there was 450 gods of Baal, Elijah says, hey, why don't you prepare your offering, since there's many of you. You go first, and then I'll go after you. So the prophets of Baal make the preparation, and they begin to wail and cry and pray and lament to Baal. In fact, at some point, they begin to cut themselves. And another side, Elijah says, maybe he's sleeping, so you just need to wake him up and cry out loud, and nothing happens. And then Elijah's turn comes. He prepares it. It was so powerful, right? So not only does he just prepare the bull and puts it on the altar, but he says he adds a challenge, add water to it. And then Elijah prays briefly. And he who created the ears, he hears. And fire falls from heaven and licks, and even the water. The Lord, he is God. This is undeniable. Here, the Bible commentary, Proven, here emphasizes that this moment reveals the exclusivity of Yahweh, the Lord, right? So the God who revealed himself to Moses by name in Exodus chapter 6, that he alone is God and all rivals are powerless. They're just man-made up things that has absolutely no form of power or no form of control. You see, rain returns in this chapter and then ending the drought. And God restores what judgment had withheld. Then we move to chapter 19. After victory comes the collapse, right? Jezebel threatens Elijah and he flees for his life. He flees. Is it enough? No. It is enough now, O Lord. Take away my life, says the prophet. He's had it. You see, dear friends, this is a revelation that following Jesus is not always an easy path. It doesn't mean that life is going to get easier, that we don't struggle. Elijah is just at a point in his life, he's just tired. And said, Lord, I've had enough and just take my life. See, this is striking. The prophet who stood boldly now breaks under fear and exhaustion. And yet God responds not with rebuke, but with care. He brings him food, rest, and then most importantly, presence. At Horeb, right? So this is Sinai. God reveals himself, not in a wind, not in an earthquake, not in fire, but in the sheer silence. In fact, the scripture says low whisper. And that's really the Hebrew word here, low whisper. The New American Commentary House highlights that this shows God's work is not always dramatic, but oftentimes it is quiet and sustained. God also corrects Elijah's perception, where he says, I alone am left, right? So woe is me, I'm the only one righteous, I'm the only one a man of integrity. God says to him, I have 7,000 Israelites, prophets who have not bowed their knees and have given their devotion over to Baal. You see, Elijah is not alone. And I know oftentimes it feels like we're alone, but we're never alone. See, God preserves a faithful remnant. And then we move to our reading from Psalm 99, so which declares the central truth behind, there's a central truth behind these chapters. Okay? And the psalm reminds us that the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. See, my dear friends, God is not merely powerful, he is holy. In fact, the Hebrew word here means set apart, utterly distinct. There's no one like him. He's matchless. Holy is he, says the psalmist. This phrase is repeated as we have been looking at Goldegate, from the Baker commentary on the Old Testament wisdom and Psalms. He notes that this Psalm 99 emphasizes God's holiness expressed in both justice and mercy. In fact, he answers his people, but also disciplines them. See, this perfectly reflects what we see in Elijah's story. See, my dear friends, you see, these passages center on one defining truth. So in the readings from First Kings, we see that God provides in scarcity, that God proves his power over false gods, and we also see that God sustains his servant in weakness. And then Psalm 99 reminds us that God reigns, that God is holy, and that God is just, and he is abundantly merciful. And so for today, then, the readings for today, they have a unifying truth, which is that God alone, right? So Yahweh alone is sovereign, holy, and worthy of full allegiance, whether in power or even in silence. You see, Elijah shows us both bold faith and then deep, absolutely deep weaknesses. So yet, the key element in this is that God remains constant, God remains faithful, that God remains true, which ultimately then points us to the one true righteous person, Jesus Christ. He is the true prophet who perfectly trusts the Father and reveals God fully. Even in the garden, as he was getting ready to the cross, God, not my will, but yours be done. The perfect, obedient Son and perfect prophet. So, my dear friends, from these readings, then, I believe that they confront us in multiple levels. First, they challenge us. It challenges divided loyalty. See, we cannot serve God and something else. And then you can fill in what that something else is. He alone is worthy of our allegiance and worship, adoration, and service. And second, the chapters today, they expose false sources of trust. Right? Baal promises but cannot deliver. And then thirdly, it speaks to spiritual exhaustion, and it does happen. See, the reality is even faithful people can become overwhelmed. Now, are you not glad in that moment of feeling overwhelmed and questioning God's loyalty? That God does not come to us with rebuke, but he meets us in our needs. And then finally, dear friends, the readings from today, they reveal to us that God cares. Right? He really does, deeply and intentionally. He sustains not only in power, but even in weaknesses. So, dear friends, as I wrap it up, here is what I want to say, right? So let us choose clearly. Let us not waver between God and competing loyalties. Let us trust him for provision, even when resources are scarce. I beg of us, let us stand firm when truth is opposed. And when you are tired, come to him. In Matthew 11, it says, come ye who are weary and heavy laden, for I will give you rest. See, my dear friends, God does not abandon his servants. He sustains them. He sustains them, and he will sustain you. He is faithful through history. He's faithful today. He will always be forever. So let's faithful today. He will always be forever. So let us continue to return to the word, even when I fail to do my reflection. I still encourage you to return back to the word. Stay faithful in reading. Above it all, I beg of you, please stay dependent on God and his word. And also want to encourage you, stay under the word. As always, thank you so much for watching this video and for spending part of your day with me. As if this video has been helpful, I encourage you to share with friends and encourage them to join us as we remain under the word. God bless you.